Detailed history of the Federal Reserve Bank notes. Part 3, the next phase, which is to say that which appears as series of 1928. Now, one thing introduced for series of 1928 is that after the initial release of a given denomination, which would just say series of 1928, anytime there was a change that affected that denomination, a letter would be appended or incremented. So the next thing would be a 1928A, and then a 1928B and C, and in one extreme case even a D. But it would just be 1928 for the first to make an appearance in that given denomination, and then the second would be 28A and so forth. Whereas before, well, let's take a look at what there would have been before. So here's our $5, a nice typical series of 1928 $5 note here, series of 1928. And the treasurer is on this side, Tate, and the Secretary of the Treasury is on this side. Now up here, this is just for comparison, the previous Federal Reserve note. In fact, it's not only $5, it's even the same particular bank, 6 or F or Georgia. You can see the 6 and the F on there. They put 6-F. When they went to the small size, they just put the number in here and the number in 4 places, just as they also have the number, but here with F here and there in some places. But what happened here is you still see the F on the serial numbers, even as the other would have the F in the serial number, because the F identifies that it's the Bank of Atlanta, Georgia. So another thing that's kind of neat and common is that Federal Reserve notes have the treasurer on this side, which before was White and now it's Tate. And on the other side, however, it was the same one, Mellon. So, which is kind of unusual because the large size notes, with the lone exception of large size Federal Reserve notes, and this doesn't even include Federal Reserve Bank notes, which do the same thing all the other, silver certificates and gold certificates and national bank notes, etc. is doing, which would be to have the register of the Treasury on this side and then the treasurer on that side. So if you see like a Tate and Burke Federal Reserve Bank note, Tate would be on this side, and that would be the register of the Treasury, and then Burke would be on this side. Whereas with this, Burke was here because he's the treasurer, and on this side you would have various different people, McAdoo, Glass, or Houston, and so forth. So now, what else changed? I mean, obviously you can see the size has changed significantly. See, it's very much wider and also somewhat taller, so the proportions are about the same. And they both, of course, have Federal Reserve note at the top, United States of America, and will pay to the bearer on demand. Here, this has it at the bottom, and then $5. This one also had Federal Reserve note also at the bottom as well as the top, and even also on the back. So, as you can see, all that was series of 1914, despite all the signature changes. If they'd been following the letter rule, it would have been a 1914C, but they weren't using letters yet. Now, let's see. Let's compare the seals here, the Federal Reserve Bank indicator. You can see the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Georgia, 6 in one case or 6F in the other. A little bit of decorations. They got a little more space on the paper, and so they can decorate it a little bit. And on the other side, also the Great Seal. Now, this one is decorated again all around the outside with this sort of thing. They call it scalloping because they look kind of like scallop shells, a little anyway. And they took that away and just replaced it with these itty-bitty spikes. Again, they just had more space to decorate it. But inside that decoration, you can see that the gut of the seal itself would be identical, except that it was blue, and it originally had been red in the very first phase of Federal Reserve, and now it was green. So that pretty well shows some differences. Now, there's one other really interesting difference here, is what it reads at the bottom here. The old one, and we'll compare that to its equivalent on the new. It says, "This note is receivable by all national and member banks and Federal Reserve banks, and for all taxes, customs, and other public dues. It is redeemable in gold on demand at the Treasury Department of the United States in the City of Washington, District of Columbia, or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve bank. So one big thing about the Federal Reserve note, as distinct from others, even the Federal Reserve bank note, is that it is the United States of America that will pay to the bearer on demand and not the particular bank in question. So this is all still true. It's still the United States of America that will pay, but now let's see how this has simplified that statement a bit. It just says now, and move to the front, you see, redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury or in gold or lawful money at any federal bank. So those who have seen the small head currency that still sometimes shows up in our circulation are probably fairly familiar because not a whole lot has changed. A few things, and we'll talk about those as they come along. There's our familiar back, and there was not only the $5 but the $10 from Tate and Mellon, and same overall look, and that's its back. And then it'd be the $20 again, Tate and Mellon, 1928. Well, they made a change, and that change was that Tate was replaced by Woods. So we have a new treasurer, Woods, and because of that, this goes to 1928A. But other than that, it's the same as you'd see. Let's see. Did I show the backs of these? No, I didn't. Here, hold on. $10 just looks normal. Yeah. And $20 just looks like pretty much like what you'd expect. We'll talk about that later on down the series too. All right, $10 again, Woods and Mellon. So it's 1928A. Here's his back. And the $20, 1928A, Woods and Mellon, but it's otherwise the same. And okay, 1950, 1928. Now, see, that's denominations now being introduced during the time that Woods is treasurer. So that's the first one, even though it already has Woods instead of Tate, but it's still a series of 1928. And then there's the $100, which is also 1928. So let's see. Oh, and the 50. Here's the look of the 50. Most people would be familiar with that. And then it'd be the $100 again, Woods and Tate, and that's of course the reverse. Well, we had another change. We wanted to stick the letter for the Federal Reserve Bank, A through L, instead of 1 through 12, inside this circle. We'll still keep the numbers here, 6, 6, 6, and 6, which was the number for Atlanta, Georgia, as we saw in the original one here. But now, instead of the 6 or the 6-F that had been in the large side, now it's just the F in there. So, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Georgia. So that's what changed here, and that little change alone is still Woods and Mellon, but now it's 1928B, 1928B. Okay. And the $10, oh, and here was his back. Again, no changes there. And then here's the $10. And he goes to B for the same reason. Namely, now instead of 5, it's E. And here's his back. One other thing just worth noting, there were actually 2 different colors of ink that sometimes got used for the seal. You can see the 5 has a somewhat darker color, whereas the 10 has a lighter. Seals tend to sometimes be in one color or the other in the early days of the Federal Reserve note. And it is a different ink. It's not just that something's faded. So here, 1928B, same thing, the $20, but still Woods and Mellon. Just now we have a G instead of a 7 in that circle. Back looks the same as before. Now the 50 moves to a 1928B and 28A. Okay. You know, with now still having Woods and Mellon, but now having a letter inside. No change to the back. And the $100 is 128A for the same reason. Still Woods and Mellon, same kind of back. Now some more higher denominations come out once the letter is placed inside the circle, and that would be the large denominations. We'll start with the 500. So now it's just 1928, no letter, but you can see it's not only Woods and Mellon, but also there's a letter in there instead of a number. And here's the back. So there's something probably not quite so commonly seen. And then there's the 1000. Again, the same thing. We've got Woods and Mellon. It's got the letter, but it's just series 1928. And there's no need to do any further runs with other letters on them during this period. Here's the back of this. Again, probably not too commonly seen, but now there it is. And that's the 1000. There are larger denominations. I regret I can't show them, but a 5,000 and a 10,000. But they are also all 1928, no letter. And they have the letter for the bank inside the circle and the names of Woods and Mellon. So I can just say those things are consistent. Well, there was another change before long, and that was the change of the Secretary of the Treasury from Mellon to Mills. You can read that scribble. It's Ogden Mills. So at any rate, that change, that signature change alone is enough to say, let's go to the next letter. So now the 28B goes up to a 28C, and the 28 here, also B, goes up to C. And again, you see the Mills, and again, for the $20. These were made and used frequently enough that it made sense to do more runs during the time that Mills was the Secretary of the Treasury. Again, there's no change to the backs for these things. Apparently, there was no need to run any larger denominations. Finally, as we get towards the end of this 1928D, and what changed here, again, we got another Secretary of the Treasury, Woodin. Now, Woodin, he was in there for a very short time. In fact, only 5 different notes of various kinds were issued during his extremely short time as the Secretary of the Treasury. So, otherwise, it's just D. It's all the same. You see the letter, you see the Woods over here, but now it's Woodin. That same combination of signatures would be found only on a silver certificate, Series 1928C, and the one and only $1 United States note, dated 1928. And then there'd be a change to the treasurer to Julian, but keeping Woodin, and in that state there'd be no Federal Reserve notes, only a 1928D, $1 silver certificate, and then a 1933, $10 silver certificate. So I apologize for the condition of this. I should point out, again, no change to the design on the back. I should point out that 1929D Federal Reserve notes, which is just this one denomination, tend to be quite pricey and difficult to come by, and this was the best I could find. So next we'll be moving into another phase of the series 1934 with some more changes, namely to the text we have up here. No more mention of gold. But that's what we have for the third phase, 1928, series of 1928, for the Federal Reserve note.